Doctor Who is a franchise that has been going on for so long that it has inspired many people to be involved with it. In fact, when the show was revived in 2005, every single writer was a fan of the original run, and had been involved with the show during the wilderness years between 1989 and 2005. One of these writers was a certain Steven Moffat, who penned the acclaimed and beloved Empty Child two-parter of Series 1. Having impressed showrunner Russell T Davies with the story, it was no surprise that he was asked to return for Series 2 the following year, to write a story about Madame Pompadour, who Davies had become fascinated with during the creation of his limited series Casanova, also starring new Dr. David Tennant. This story eventually became The Girl in the Fireplace, which sees the Doctor, Rose and Mickey arrive on a spaceship, which is connected to 18th century France, where the Doctor soon falls in love with Madame Pompadour herself. Often regarded by fans as one of the best modern Doctor Who stories, does this episode really deserve the high praise?
I'm the Doctor, and I just snogged Madame de Pompadour.
After an in media res cold open, the episode begins with our TARDIS crew arriving on a spaceship, which Mickey very much likes, reacting how pretty much all of us would.
It's a spaceship. Brilliant, I got a spaceship on my first go.
We're introduced to a slow burn mystery which ends up being extremely familiar. Steven Moffat takes a major plot point from his last Doctor Who story and repeats it in this episode. In the Empty Child two-parter of Series 1, the monsters aren't really villains in the traditional sense, because they're just alien technology trying to do its job without understanding what it's doing. This is the exact same for the clockwork droids in this episode, and I think this reuse detracts from the episode. The clockwork droids have killed their human crew, trying to use their body parts to fix the ship. I honestly feel like this is the more interesting story than the one we get. It could have been a body horror adventure with the crew picked off one by one, and their organics used to create some sort of H.R. Geiger monstrosity, but we soon find out that the droids are trying to capture Madame Pompadour to use her for parts. I do enjoy the clockwork droids. I think they look really good visually, with their period disguise allowing them to blend into the setting despite having a see-through domed head with all the workings inside. They do look really sinister, and their introduction is great, with the Doctor realising that Renee's clock is broken but there's still a ticking sound, leading him to discover the droid hiding underneath the bed. But here's the thing, he already did this the year before, with the tapes in the Empty Child's hospital room. It makes the reuse of this less impactful, because we've already done this bit. The Girl in the Fireplace has too many Moffatisms. Now don't get me wrong, I adore Moffat's work on Doctor Who, but in this episode he uses so many things that would become typical tropes of his stories. Outside of what it uses from Series 1, it's not really the fault of this episode, but it severely damages its rewatchability. The concept between the Doctor and Renee is the same as Amy Pond in the 11th Hour, with Amy seeing the Doctor when she was a child, and creating this imaginary friend out of it, like how Renee considers him her guardian angel, after seeing him as a child. The mind-melding scene also uses the concept of the Doctor being a lonely child, along with the mystery of his name, which became one of the biggest elements of the 11th Doctor era.
Doctor Who. It's more than just a secret, isn't it?
As I said, the Moffatisms in this story weren't really Moffatisms at the time, but when you revisit this episode after Moffat's time as showrunner, they can hamper your enjoyment of the episode, because you've seen them all before. It's filled to the brim with what would become frustrating Moffat cliches, and it just makes something feel a bit off. To paraphrase a great man who still owes me pizza rolls, you may not notice it, but your brain does. Even though the Doctor and Renee's relationship is kind of like the Doctor and River Song's future relationship, I like how the time travel is used in this episode. The spaceship has time windows that lead to different moments in Renee's life. This serves as the main storytelling device of the episode, because the Doctor goes through these windows to meet her throughout her life, starting with their first meeting when she is a little girl. Time passes differently in both of the main settings of the episode, which is similar to the theory of relativity, since Renee ages more the longer the Doctor is on the ship and away from France. It creates an interesting dynamic because you don't know what the Doctor will find when he goes from one setting to the other. It's also used really well at the end of the story, with the Doctor arriving back in France to collect Renee, only to discover that she has died. Having these portals between the far future and the distant past is a great contrast, and good use of more grounded, realistic time travel. It also serves as a good way to show the Doctor's struggle with his own immortality, especially after he was also faced by it in the previous episode, where he was forced to confront Sarah Jane, a companion he left behind. The Girl in the Fireplace shows how the Doctor can't deal with people's eventual deaths, because he never ages, but Renee becomes older every time they meet, which she refers to as the slow road.
You do not appear to have aged a single day. That is tremendously impolite of you.
The episode is a pseudo-celebrity historical, centering around Madame de Pompadour, mistress of King Louis XV of France. Hey, don't question it, the pre-revolutionary French were flexible people.
France. It's a different planet.
I like the choice of a more obscure historical figure compared to Charles Dickens and Queen Victoria. It means the story is less predictable, because most viewers won't know what her life entailed. Well, unless they're French or history buffs. Or French history buffs. Honestly, I must admit I don't like the relationship between Renee and the Doctor. As I said before, he visits her throughout her life, with his third visit being to Renee as a grown woman, who for some reason immediately wants to bone that one guy who came through her fireplace when she was 7 years old. He soon falls in love with her too, and pretty much forgets about his own growing relationship with Rose, which kind of derails the overall Series 2 development between the two. I won't deny that David Tennant and Sophia Myles have fantastic chemistry, but I just find it odd that the Doctor falls in love with Renee after only knowing her for less than maybe half a day total, and she only really met him for 5 minutes before falling in love with him. Neither of them spend enough time together on screen, so I find it difficult to believe why they feel so strongly about each other. Sure, they have that great mind melding scene where the Doctor tries to read her mind, but she reads his instead, but we don't really see them develop this romantic relationship. It just kind of happens. Eventually the Clockwork robots find the right time to attack Renee, but the Doctor breaks through a time window to save her, sealing him in the past with her. It makes sense for him to save her, but the thing nobody seems to notice is that he lets himself get lost in the past, without caring about Rose and Mickey, just leaving them on the ship to drift in space forever. Some friend he is. The B-plot of the episode is Rose and Mickey's wacky misadventure on the spaceship. And when I say B-plot, I mean the B stands for because they needed to be used somewhere. Throughout the episode, they're just kind of there. Like, Moffat was told they had to be there, but he didn't really have them in his initial script. So he just kind of shut them in the living room and put Power Rangers on VHS, while the adults had more important things to do in the bedroom. They explore the ship against the Doctor's instructions and find the more interesting story, coming across the human eye CCTV and the human heart powering machinery, before themselves being caught by the Clockwork droids, about to be used to fix the ship. The Doctor suddenly remembers they exist, coming back drunk from a party and stumbling around like Johnny Depp in Pirates of the Caribbean, but it turns out to be a playful ruse to disable the droids. I really like this scene, it's so fun and Tennant does such a great job boozing it up, like he's drunk half his body weight in wine. But then the plot just kind of forgets about Rose and Mickey again, making Rose look like a huge idiot when she is sent back to warn Renee, and Renee says what Rose should have said instead, showing my love-hate relationship with Moffat's insistent use of quotable poetry dialogue. I just think the episode is a really bad usage of our main trio, especially because this is Mickey's only proper outing in the TARDIS. It disrupts that momentum he started to build up in School Reunion, once again making him look useless and out of place.
What's a horse doing on a spaceship?
Mickey, what's pre-revolutionary France doing on a spaceship? Get a little perspective.
I do enjoy the highly emotional ending of The Girl in the Fireplace. After the Doctor saves Renee, they have a conversation about now being on the slow path together, although we soon find out that she had the original Fireplace transported to the palace, which allows the Doctor to go back to the ship. I find this part really weird because it makes the Doctor look incredibly stupid and short-sighted. Not only did he just potentially leave Rose and Mickey to die a slow and horrible death in space, but he also seems to overlook the fact that every time he has gone through a time window, significant time has passed for Renee. He's well aware that time passes wildly differently between the two places, but he still goes back to the ship without her, expecting that everything will be fine. Spoiler, it isn't. When the Doctor comes back to France to collect Renee and jet off to the stars, he finds out that she's dead and King Louis gives him a letter she wrote for him. I like how the Doctor is completely silent throughout, almost struggling to keep it together as he returns to the TARDIS. Tennant does such a fantastic job with it, and you really feel his loss, showing a very human side of the Doctor. I also love how Mickey silently understands what the Doctor is going through and takes Rose away to give the Doctor some alone time. It's such an underrated part of the scene, and really drives home how emotional it is. Okay, so I know this video has been pretty negative, but I actually really do enjoy The Girl in the Fireplace. I think it's a great episode, but it's so overrated, which is a statement I know a lot of people take issue with, but I think it's by far the weakest of the 4 Steven Moffat stories during the Russell T Davies era. It has a very fairy tale period atmosphere, with great acting and a really strong cast, but there's just something off about it for me. I think it always gets so hyped up that you go into it expecting some masterpiece that blows you away and leaves you breathless, but it ends up only being a phenomenal episode. It's let down on rewatches by all the Moffatisms, even if they're not technically Moffatisms yet. The Clockwork Droids, despite being visually striking, stem from the exact same basic concept of the empty child, and the episode makes the Doctor pretty much discard Rose, who he has previously been lovesick for, and goes straight back to being lovesick for right after this. As an episode, it kind of feels out of place in Series 2, a weird bump in the road that really disrupts the character developments of the Doctor, Rose and Mickey. Having said all of that, I think it deserves an A rank on the Series 2 tier list, but it's not the mind-blowing S rank masterpiece most fans would have you believe. The relationship between Renee and the Doctor is hard to buy into, even though the ending is a bittersweet, emotional gut punch that perfectly ends the episode. I like the contrast of the two main settings, but once again, I really wish we could have had more of a focus on the body horror aspect of the ship's crew being assimilated into organic machinery. I do really want to stress that I don't hate this episode. In fact, far from it. It's amazing, but I personally find a few too many holes in it that downgrade it for me, even if some are just nitpicks. It's a wonderful standalone episode, but it doesn't really fit into Series 2 as a whole. I just feel like the tone is off for the placement of the episode, probably because it was originally supposed to be the second story of the series, but was moved because The Runaway Bride was bumped up to Christmas 2006, and Tooth and Claw quickly shoehorned into the episode 2 slot. This means the character motivations in The Girl in the Fireplace aren't supported by what came before, or what follows. Speaking of what follows, it's almost time to complete the Mickey Smith redemption arc with the help of some big metal stompy boys.